Hi there, welcome to SUI Wyckoff Technical Analysis session. SUI has recovered most of its position from the loss of last week. However, there is some significant force building up. It's basically continuing from the trend over the past few weeks, and we're getting closer and closer to the release of that build-up pressure. So near the end of this month, latest by early November, that's the breakout time that it's going to get the price swing much bigger than what we had over the past 4 to 6 weeks. So let's find out from both the weekly and daily chart and see what's going on with SUI. This is the weekly chart. As usual, we start with the bigger picture and then look into the more frequent time frame, the daily. Currently, the volume itself is or has been slowly increasing over the past 5 weeks after the significant fall from mid-July all the way to end of August. So there's a little bit of momentum picking up. Previously, we have drawn this downward trend line saying this line crosses the light blue key level of $3.27, and that's where the breakout time point is, and it did happen, and we've got this early December climb to challenge the blue key level of $3.9. And now, since it's well past, it's time to move the line and see where the next time point is. So from that point to this candlestick over here, this LPSY to the second LPSY, it's pointing towards October 10th, but then I already mentioned that candlestick is basically outside of this wedge already. So much like what we had earlier, that breakout did not happen at the time point where the lines crosses. It happened before, actually 3 weeks ahead of the time point. So this time, if we draw the line over here when it points to October, the week of October 10th, that means somewhere around mid to late this month or the first week of November, the latest, the breakout will happen again. And this time, why I'm saying it's likely going to be bigger is because of the Bollinger Band Keltner squeeze that's going on. Let me shrink a little. You see this large patch of this vertical bar over here, this shade, basically means the purple lines, let me switch off the drawings, the purple lines are within the orange that triggers this bar from appearing. For me, this time it's actually pretty close, but the squeeze kind of started somewhere here, while this purple edge, it was still a bit far from the orange, but it was close enough at a point during mid-June, so quite a bit of consolidation has been happening already. Even if we count just the technical definition by the indicator itself, the accumulation or the consolidation has started at the end of August, and we are already 6 weeks into this build-up. So when we get closer into the end of this month, that would have had around 10 weeks, 9 to 10 weeks of build-up already, and that that swing would be pretty big. So if you want to see some references, if you're new to my sessions, last time we've got a squeeze was back in August 2024 all the way into September, early September, that around early mid-September, because the end of that week was actually September 15th. So it's basically mid-August to mid-September for an entire month. And then that swing was massive. So initial leg upward, and then with a smaller leg downwards, around about 80% of this leg. So I'm talking about, let's say this is, if this is 100, this is the length of it I'm talking about. This is about 80, and then it further drops to around 60, 50, and then this is how the waves started to shrink in magnitude and then gather strength again just to give us another big swing. So Hope it's clear. The time point is near the end of this month, any time from now till end of the month. And then eventually, this swing is going to be a lot bigger than what we have since, I would say, July. So let me switch off the Bollinger Band Corner Squeeze for the time being and go back to the Wyckoff. So we know, we talk about this, that the chance of having an LPSY was lower than that of the SOW, the sign of weakness. But now it seems this week's climb has given us another LPSY. I'm not going to remove this question mark yet, while it seems it certainly is there if the price comes down next week. So there's still 6 hours for this week's candle, and I don't think it will be that dramatic for it to turn red and come down to hit the green key level. So that's likely confirmed, but we'll wait for another week before that. And then now the price is still staying above this light blue key level. If it continues to trade narrow range within this wedge over here and above this key level, that's when the squeeze going to get even deeper, and that's what I have just talked about. I'm not going to repeat again. So we're just waiting for a point where it's going to break this wedge and swing outside of it. Obviously, if you're bullish about SUI, you want it to hit to the another upthrust of the distribution. If I have tagged it correctly, that was the first upthrust of the distribution over there in January this year. And unless we treat these as a selling climax and then basically a quick accumulation cycle for 6 weeks, and we've got the buying climax upthrust, and this is actually another distribution cycle. Otherwise, I would just tag it as a UT82 if it really comes back to this level. So if I have spoken too quickly, let me do it this way instead. So in other charts, you would have seen me draw a different scenario, because the charts are pretty crazy for cryptos. If we put in Wyckoff tags, let's say if this was the selling climax back in March this year, and this was the automatic rally, meaning SUI was actually accumulating at a higher level, much higher level than what we had back in July 2024. So if that's the case, and that was the spring over there instead of an SOW, what we had here was an not LPSY, the PSY, preliminary supply. And then this was actually a buying climax. So 2 consecutive distributions, but at having different shapes. So that was the other scenario I was talking about, and this would naturally be just an upthrust of the distribution instead of a continuation of what we had back in December 2024. So that's what I'm talking about. So a lot of times when we look at Wyckoff method, we assumed that the price would return to a level similar to what we had before for accumulation. But the thing is, a lot of times it doesn't. It would end up somewhere higher and then accumulate at that level, particularly for assets that are in an ascending trend. Like according to the timeline, it's basically having a higher and higher base. So that's why I have this second scenario in place, just to make sure we haven't missed another angle looking into an asset that's potentially gaining value over time. So let's say if there are more diamond hands supporting SUI, so you won't expect SUI to get as steep as what it had been back in 2024 or even 2023. Both were at a level lower than the red key level of $1. So that's the fact over here. So if more people got in and support, the price pushes the base above, say, $1.5, obviously the lowest point it could get to should be above this orange key level or even this long-term playground zone. When that happens, I will have to adjust this box as well, the magnitude or how far it goes up. But now it's still too early to tell. Once this start to get more established, or when this distribution cycle eventually gets to its finish and returns to an accumulation, then is the time to do bigger adjustments. So that's the big picture, and remember this time point, anytime from now till the end of the month, latest by the first week of November. Now let's get to the daily. For the daily, the squeeze isn't as obvious, but if it continues to trade narrow range, much like it's doing right now, again, these for me is already in the squeeze zone. Just that because it's governed by the weekly time frame, like I always share. That's why we always look at the weekly first, because the daily just can't behave in a way that beyond what the weekly is doing. So here it's kind of having a similar scenario where we are still in a distribution, but then similar to what I said earlier, while this looks more normal because we only had an upthrust without an upthrust of the distribution yet, so when it eventually climbs up, that may be the UTAD for the daily time frame. Just that for daily, it will be more tricky when the price really eventually breaks above and heads towards the distribution cycle of or another peak for the weekly. Then we have to see how it evolves in order to tag the correct Wyckoff stages. Because if it is something like this, that would be rather easy, right? There's no intermediate fluctuation during the climb to the buying climax. But if it's something like this, right, it's jagged along the way. So if it has many peaks, if I discount this, if I treat this as the backup or last point of support period, we've got 1 peak, 2 peaks, 3 peaks, and then the 4th. So if you put in a buying climax, upthrust of the distribution, this should be UTAD2, right? And this isn't wrong in my perspective. It's according to the Wyckoff principles. It's basically another test. So whether we name it UTAD2, 3, 4, it doesn't matter. It basically means the test of demand continue and the distribution continue until people got panic and then they really sell everything and people catch the falling knife, and then some more people selling, and people just kept buying the dip until they find out it's really the deepest dip that happened. So that's the part of the human psychology over there. Okay, back to the daily chart here. This, when we look at the lines here, I just want to make sure we've got this as tight as possible. I'm not trying to move the channel, I'm trying to move away these tags, just to make sure we've got the white line aligning to the tip of the wick. So we've got one over here and the other over here. So this, yeah, it's exactly the week of November 10th, and it should happen, the breakout should happen before that particular date or week. Just checking this channel box we're in. Obviously this yellow line provided support. That's why the prices did not hit the bottom of the channel box, and now it's heading towards the ceiling of the box. I put in this tag here. It's likely the case, but not 100%. I won't say, as you know, there's nothing 100% because we are not prophets. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. If SUI announce some big news in the next few days, this is obviously going to shoot up, and for that I won't know now. So here I just want to say, if the price continues to go up, this white dashed line will be a resistance. So for the next few days, somewhere around $3.8 all the way to 3.7, depending on when the price hit this line, it may show signs of selling or rebound from that level. Well, we hope to see it test the ceiling, but then that's the reality. We've got a resistance line over here. Okay, just to make sure I have covered everything before we moved on to the next session. So previously we talked about the selling climax. If it really continues to come, when the big swing happen. So in the beginning we talk about that. When we get closer to this, and if it swing towards the downside, obviously the first it hits is this light blue key level. But if the squeeze force is so large, I don't think that will hold. And then it will come down to challenge this green key level, assuming that's the bearish scenario. Let me extend this channel box further. And then eventually, the third level of support would be the bottom edge of the downward channel. And see whether it would rebound somewhere along these two lines. And eventually, obviously, whether it's going to come down to show us a selling climax, much like what we had back in mid-June. Again, this is very, very future, unless SUI is having a very bad news coming out that triggers the drop to the selling climax prematurely before we even get to this time point near the end of this month. So trade safe. Thanks for joining me for SUI session. I'm moving to the next one. See you over there. Ciao.